1% on every international financial transaction. That's a lot of money.
That is a lot.
You're talking independence now. Then they don't have to beg for their money. It's no more Mr. Nice Guy when we quit paying the bills and they have the independent funding. So they've got to have their world tax. They have to have a world court to enforce those tax orders and to enforce United Nations law, quote, and they have to have an army. They have to have a world army. Okay, well, they're trying to do that with them in the military. The International Criminal Court is being placed into position, and the tax is proposed. The things are there. I've got a United Nations publication on my desk in my office, put out by UNESCO, in which a guy by the name of Visas, who is from Spain, says that one of the proposals that UNESCO is making is that all military bases will be turned over to the United Nations. Well, when you see that Al Gore has signed away all of our not all, but many of our national parks through treaty agreements, so that even though we get to pay the taxes and we get to pick up the garbage and pave the roads, they get to make the decisions where people go, what animals are introduced. The large policy decisions are made by the United Nations at Smoky Mountain National Park, at the Grand Canyon, etc.
Including where the Liberty Bell is housed.
Exactly.
Also.
Exactly. World Heritage Site. These things are alarming developments, and they're all headed towards one world government. Anyone who thinks or who says that they're not headed to one world government is an ignoramus. They have not studied the issues.
Now, just out of curiosity, is this something, are these issues that you were aware of before all this happened, or maybe just slightly aware of, and now you've become more informed? Or how did that timeline go about as far as with Michael making his stand?
I'm ashamed to tell you that Michael was not as informed about the United Nations as he could have been and should have been for his age, and I take the blame for that, because as a parent and in a homeschooling atmosphere, I should have taught him more about the United Nations.
I don't know, I'd say for him to make a stand, the kind of stand that he did, though, I mean, that's still pretty impressive.
But I mean, you know, his sergeant asked him, who's the Secretary General of the United Nations, and he didn't know. You know, there are gaps in every child's education, and homeschoolers are the same way. But yes, I was aware of these things because my father taught them to me, and I was in the process of teaching them to my kids. But we were working overseas in a missionary capacity, and we tended to focus more on the positive aspects of what it is to be an American. We also tried to teach our children to think for themselves. You put those two factors together, you know, probably that's all you need to do. You know, teach them to
how dangerous, ask questions, think on your own.
The Bible, teach them the documents of the founding fathers. And I wrote a letter to my dad, and I'd forgotten about it, but he gave me a copy. He gave me the letter the other day, and I'd forgotten writing it, but there it is in my own handwriting from the Philippines. And I had said, here's Michael, who was 12 at the time, and he had asked me to teach him more about the Declaration and the Constitution and all that stuff, you know. So, I mean, clearly we were working on that education, and he had a hunger to understand about freedom and the concepts of freedom. So I guess what we really did was we focused more on a foundational thing. But he didn't have his facts. He had to do a lot of research to be able to contend in the thing. And to finish answering your question, I have certainly learned a lot since then. I mean, people have sent us books by the 50 pounds.
It's got to be overwhelming.
Oh man, I tell you, it's a full-time job to open the mail and to. I can't even begin to read all the books that people send us and the videos, and it's a wonderful thing, and yet I feel inadequate to be able to respond to it. But it's been such a spontaneous outpouring all over the country.
I was going to say, I can't even imagine what you go through. I mean, I'm in a relatively small city in Austin. Like I said, I get about 45, 50 emails a day, and I feel so guilty that you can't respond to every single one in the way that you want. And so what you go through, I mean, I can't even comprehend. You have got to be intensely proud. I mean, for your son to make that type of stand, I mean, you're talking about, I mean, David and Goliath doesn't even begin to describe it, and it's not something that was easy for him either.
You know, it's funny, he says it wasn't that difficult. To me, I think that at that age, I could have made the same decision, would have made the same decision, and could have told it. See, the colonel offered him what they call an Article 15, you know, just a slap on the wrist. You know, it's like it's like a speeding ticket. You get an Article 15.
He probably have to work extra duty, like instead of 8 hours days, 12-hour days for, say, 30 days.
Yeah, exactly. And he said, and he said the colonel could tell that he was going to say, nah, I don't want it. I'll take the court.
But he had to do it.
He said, all right, look, it's Friday. Wait till Monday. You know, think about it. You know. So Monday morning at 0900, he goes back in and he says, well, have you thought about it, son? He says, yes, sir. I'll take the court martial, sir. Now I could have said that, but I don't think I could have done what he did next. he went out and ate lunch and held it down. You know, I mean, I would have been really uptight having to go to the colonel and say, no, you know, I'll take
that. And like you said, loving it so much. I mean, I don't care what anybody says. There has to be a certain amount of feelings. I hate to use the word betrayal, but it's got to tear. I mean, you say it was easy, but it would have to tear at me.
Well, yes. At the same time, there's I guess of all the factors that I've got in my in both Gabriel and Michael that I see very strongly, is that when they see that clearly it's right and wrong, it doesn't matter where it falls. If it's right, it's right. You know, if it's wrong,
and I'm sure they've towed the line publicly. But have you been able to speak to some of these officers and some of the people that surrounded Michael privately? What they've said about it, what their reaction to it was?
Oh, so many officers, active duty personnel from all branches have come to us. Michael would be stopped on base, and a major on one occasion stopped and he says, "Are you Specialist New?" And he thought, yeah, "Can you not read a uniform, sir?" But he said, "Yes, sir." And he says, "Hang in there, buddy. You know, or you're standing for all of us."
But on the one hand, that's got to be rewarding. But on the other hand, I mean, especially as a father, you got to wonder. These are the leaders, these majors, these colonels. Why can't they come out publicly and back this kid? It'd be a totally different story if that happened.
So I think what we've proved, if nothing else, is that one, they were right. Michael was officer material. You know, and two, they're not interested in officer material.
Exactly. I've got to tell you, my experiences in the Air Force were the reasons I got out was the lack of leadership. When my dad was in, he told me it was a situation where colonels, majors, captains, they would stand up for their troop, and that troop was their responsibility. If that troop got in trouble, they'd say, "No, you let me handle it. He's my troop." And they would handle it personally. And what I saw when I was in at least one small base in the Air Force in Abilene, Texas, it was put the blame on somebody else. Cover your butt, you know.
Cover your tail and advance your career, and don't rock the boat.
And it's a disturbing trend. Everybody talks about how we may very well have the greatest military in all the land, but what I saw so many of the flaws that at times it's very difficult for me to believe that.
I'm sure that every military has always had flaws, but it's sad, and yet there are really and truly a lot of very patriotic officers, and yet, like Michael said, you know, look, these guys have got a career, they've got a wife, they've got children, they're 5 years from retirement, you know. So that's asking a lot, because they've seen what happens when you go up against the system. They chews you up and spit you out and you lose it.
My experiences were majors and above were good guys because they came from a generation that leadership meant something, integrity and honor and duty and things like that. But it seems like below the majors, that's where the cutoff was, at least in my experience.
Yeah, and it's moved up. I talked to Colonel Ray, who was the Marine Corps colonel who was our first attorney, and was also a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, a Vietnam veteran, combat veteran. And he said it's deteriorated to a higher point now. I mean, you're talking about it's gone up into the ranks of colonels and the Commander-in-Chief as well. Well, let's keep this a family show. There is legislation pending. It's awfully late this year, and I don't think it'll pass. But there is a bill, a resolution, HCR 158, which would make it against the law. Well, it just says that Congress believes that it's against the law to force Americans to wear a foreign uniform, including the United Nations uniform specifically, and only has 10 sponsors. It's amazing, you know. And a couple of them are Democrats, and 3 or 4 are Democrats, and so it's a bipartisan bill introduced by Helen Chenoweth from Idaho, and we've got a couple of Texans on there, but it's...
I would suspect Ron Paul sponsored that as well.
Ron Paul was one of the original co-sponsors, as well as Ralph Hall, a Democrat out of...
Probably Bob Barr, too.
Bob Barr's not on that list yet, but needs to be. You know, he definitely needs to be. His letter was the first letter to the Pentagon asking, what's the deal?
Bob Barr's was?
And they'd never heard of Michael New in the Pentagon, of course. And so he said, what's the deal? And this was, I mean, almost immediately. And it happened so spontaneously.
You have it, folks. Interview with Michael New, and I think it's very interesting to note. We were talking about this while we were watching this interview. The fact that Michael New feels ashamed that he could have done more. For God's sake, his son stood up. And I can't stress that to people who have been civilians their whole life, who've never had any experience with the military, to be able to look at a colonel and say, "I'm sorry, sir, I can't do that," when he's ordered you to do that and threatened you with a court-martial. I can't tell you the kind of courage that takes. It's just something you can't explain. It's just bred into the military, that type of discipline and to blindly follow orders. And for Michael New to almost be embarrassed and to feel like he could be doing more, it really tells you a lot about